No problem with hearing you.
It's too loud.
No, we'll go with that because I don't want to break anything else.
Thank you everyone for coming. I will just introduce and give a bit of health and safety first. Toilets, I think if you go out, next to the entering door and the toilet, if you want to, and earthquake, we'll go back to finish and then we'll go to Simon Street. Today we have got Paul. Paul's National Technical Leader at WSP. He was a past president of SESOC and ASG Group, chair of ASG Group, and also is part of the CPEng. We also have Jody. She's a General Strategy Manager at Engineering New Zealand. We've got an important topic. Very happy to have you both. Thanks so much. Please, all yours.
Oh, thanks, Ali. I can't take a lot of credit for this. Jody is the power behind the whole lot. I will do most of the presenting because it's a little bit difficult for Jody online. Technology is such that all my notes in presenter mode have disappeared. So we've gone old school. But first of all, thanks for having me. I'll try and make this, it's a really important topic and I'll try and make it as fun as we can along the way. Big plug at the moment, there's a consultation document out that Engineering New Zealand has put out, sorry, the Registration Authority. And if you could all sort of read and give some feedback, that would be much appreciated. The consultation ends on the 29th of November. And it will be analysed and then we'll come back out to members if we need next year. So we've done the introductions. The first thing I want to really emphasise here is this is stage one. So it's an enabling framework, right? So what we're doing at the moment is we're proposing some rule changes that will enable us to do some things in the future we want to do. And I've got some slides on that in a moment. Right, why are we here? Something that's really dear to my heart. And apologies if you've seen me do this before, but there's a quote there from David Meister: professionalism is not a label you give yourself. It's something that you hope others will apply to you. So, my journey started for this with a higher qualifications roadshow as SESOC president nearly 10 years ago now. And to be quite frank, while we're here because 115 people lost their lives in CTV. That's what started this whole journey along the way, right? So I've now dealt with 4, possibly 5 ministers of construction on this consultation, and we've had about 4 or 5 goes at consultation. We thought we had it across the line and then the government changed. So there was a strategic decision made by the CPEng board, and my words, not theirs, because theirs would be more political and diplomatically correct. Let's do it to ourselves before someone does it to us. Okay? So let's be masters of our own destiny. And then the other thing that I think we need to have at heart is we will get the reputation and the respect that we deserve by how we act. Okay, we can go out and we can tell people we're great, we're professional, we're great. But if we don't act that way, people won't think we're that way. So that's really important. So I just wanted to do that as a sort of a why are we doing this right up the front. Engineering New Zealand, fantastic organisation, but it's got dual responsibilities, and at times it could be perceived as being conflicted, right? So if you like, Engineering New Zealand is the club that we all belong to. It's our professional home. It's also contracted by the government to be the registration authority, which effectively is the government saying you are the regulatory arm. So you're kind of like a department like, you know, the Ministry of Justice or MB or anything like that. So on one hand, Engineering New Zealand is to support its members, and on the other hand, it's to be impartial and be the regulator. Okay. The regulation or the regulator side of Engineering New Zealand has got a duty to proactively manage the CPEng system and make sure it's fit for purpose. And I would suggest we'd also want that as members. The other thing to note is the public is very reliant on the CPEng system working and protecting them. So where have we been? Well, as I said, my journey started about 10 years ago. The CPEng board was established nearly 4 years ago now, and I stuck my hand up to be a board member. This is something that I'm absolutely passionate about, is looking after our profession. So what we did, or what was done in 2020, was in recognition that Engineering New Zealand could be perceived as being conflicted, they said, we will establish a CPEng board, and the mandate of that CPEng board is governance over the regulatory side of it, so the registration authority. Okay? The Engineering New Zealand board is responsible for governance of engineering as the professional, Engineering New Zealand as the professional organisation. So the first thing we did as a CPEng board, because we're engineers, we looked under the hood and we saw where the pain points were. Anybody that's been through the reassessment process in the last few years, and those that have been through it recently, I'm really hoping you would notice that there's been a dramatic improvement in both the experience as a person going through the system, and more importantly, the timings. So we eliminated a reassessment backlog, and that was no mean task. There was hundreds of people that were waiting. One of the most uncomfortable board meetings I sat at, we were talking about this, and I said, yeah, I've been waiting for 18 months for my assessment, and people looked sheepishly around the room. So we now have processing times down to 3 months, and that's from when it's due, which is a massive improvement. They introduced something called the structural triage panel, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but one of the things we've done as the CPEng board is encourage Engineering New Zealand and the regulatory business to think about the customer experience and have a bit more customer focus and put some more systems in place, and to think about where the current rules allow the wiggle room for improvements. So we introduced a structural triage panel, and that was instrumental in helping us reduce the backlog. So in effect, we've got somebody that's been chartered, has got a practice field in the structural engineering arena, and the old system was you have to go through, you have to sit an interactive interview again, you have to do this every 6 years. And we said, well, hang on. What the rules actually say is you must maintain competency. So let's test that they've maintained competency. How do we do that? Well, we'll get them to send in a CV. We'll get some knowledgeable structural engineers to look at their work, and we'll effectively put them into 3 piles. Clearly, they have maintained competency. Not so sure that the evidence is there that they've maintained competency, and we want to have a bit of a closer look at this individual. Those that have clearly maintained their competency, and if anyone's been through the system, effectively what happens is, from a technical point of view, you're given a tick, and they just get you to do an interactive, not necessarily with a structural engineer, to make sure that the professional ethics and that you're aware of a few changes and things like that. So it was once you'd done the paperwork, it was a relatively easy road. Along with that, we improved the assessment and reassessment guidance. The standard joke when I first went through it, I won't tell you how many years ago was that, is if you could understand the questions, you'd already passed, because it was a bit of a challenge to understand what they were asking at times. And more importantly, we've really strengthened the referee checking. And if anyone's going through the process or has gone through the process, the referee checking and who you choose as referees, there's a lot more guidance now and there's more rigour. We've also strengthened relationships with building consent authorities and other regulators. So we actually, when I say we, Engineering New Zealand and the Registration Authority are actually encouraging the building consent authorities to just have a word about those individuals that they have habitual concerns about. And the complaint timeframe's reduced. Oh, that's a little bit unfortunate about that. Really, this slide is the whole guts of this evening. We started out with where's the wiggle room? We are governed by effectively an act, so the CPEng Act, and sorry, I can't remember the date off the top of my head, and we're also governed by the CPEng rules. The Act has to go through all the parliamentary process, select committees, bills, the whole 9 yards to make any changes, whereas the rules can be done at a lower level with still public consultation, but with a lot less fuss. So we realised that we'd used up all the wiggle room, but we still wanted to do some more. So that's what we're consulting on at the moment. We need some rule changes to enable us to do what we want to do going forward. And we need you to say, yes, we agree with where you're heading, or actually, no, we think you should do this. So nothing's set in stone. But the rules, as proposed, are designed to enable raising of the standards. So what are we proposing? And I'll spend the rest of the presentation talking about each of the three of these areas. We're proposing to introduce new classes of registration, and we'll talk about that later. We're proposing to make some operational changes to the continued registration process and strengthen the complaints and disciplinary system. Unfortunately, some of the high-profile cases that have gone through lately have really tested the system to the point where, okay, I won't say it's not fit for purpose, but it's really tested. So we just have to modernise a few things. I love this photo, by the way. I snapped that at a roundabout in Wales. Am I allowed to make jokes about traffic engineers? No. So whenever you set these things up, the CPEng board were absolutely determined that we would have some broad principles. Number one, it's improving public safety. We're not proposing anything unless it meets these three principles. Number two, ensuring the system works for the public, the regulators and the profession. When number two was first proposed, it was ensuring the system works for the profession. No. This is outward facing. So we've been very deliberate. It's the public, the regulators and the profession. And importantly, we only want to change the rules if it's going to improve the quality of outcomes. So very much the mantra is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we do want to enable some changes in the future. Classes. This is the one to get your head around. I said we started this journey with CTV. All previous consultations, every time they've talked about whether it's licensing, whether it's classes or whatever, they always talk about structural, geotech, fire. Okay, so however you cut the mustard, as structural engineers, this will affect us. So the current rules say that you have to have classes, but it doesn't enable multiple classes. So if you like, currently we have a class and we're calling it a general class. And that general class is CPEng. Okay. It's governed under the regulations or the rules by 12 minimum competency standards. Now, Engineering New Zealand has sort of bundled those up in some of the documentation that you read, but when you actually go into the CPEng rules, there are 12 competencies that you must demonstrate. So the proposal is that we're going to introduce new classes. Now, new classes is not yet defined. It's just enabling new classes to be introduced at a future date. But we've put some rules around when we'll do new classes. So is there a significant risk of public safety or harm proposed by substandard work? Or is there a regulatory need? Or is the profession ready for it? There's a whole bunch of disciplines out there that say, hey, yeah, we want a class for us. But I don't think they're ready for it. What's likely to happen in the future, and this is not set in stone, if the classes are enabled through a rule change, the technical societies or the technical groups of Engineering New Zealand, so that would be SESOC, would be one of them, will develop something called a body of knowledge and skills, or a box. So they would work jointly with the regulator to decide what the standard is for each of those classes. And I've got some diagrams in a minute that might help you understand that. So what is being proposed is effectively an applicant, this is not a reassessment, this is a first-time applicant, goes in just as they do now, and they enter a general class which has minimum competency standards. Now, it's too early to say whether you would do that in the future for one of these new classes at the same time, or whether they'd be separate interviews, or whether, you know, it could well be that as a result of the bodies of skills and knowledge, you might be able to get CPEng after 4 years, but it might be a different time level for a structural class, for example. Don't know. So all of that's on the table, and all of that will be consulted in the future. This consultation is about, can we introduce more than one class? Assuming that we get buy-in for introducing more than one class, the bodies of knowledge will be dreamed up, and candidates will be assessed against that body of knowledge and skill. And registration in a new class with a defined scope will be given. So you'll have a general one, and you'll also have a class one. So currently, we've kind of got a little bit of that. We've got some register specificity. So we've got design verifiers for pressure vehicles and cranes and passenger ropeways, and we've got recognised engineer for dam safety. So kind of got that, but we're proposing something slightly different in terms of these classes. So possible classes, we might have heavy vehicles, we might have fire, we might have geotechnical, and we might have structural. And obviously you're all interested in structural. It could very well be that there's more than one structural class, for example. You don't want to make this thing too complicated, but there might be something for high-rise. There might be something for those people that specialise in residential. The thought process is currently, and you may or may not know this, when a BCO, so Building Consent Officer, or a TA, actually reviews your building consent application, they effectively, all of their buildings they assign as residential 1, 2, 3, commercial 1, 2, 3, and it just depends. They've got a matrix in terms of complexity. So it may well be that we look at that as a system bearing in mind that one of the drivers is to make this easier for the regulator, and we go, actually, we could weave into this and we could have some classes. There's all sorts of water to go under the bridge at a future date. There is a technical group that's called GPs, so general practitioners. So those people have got a civil engineering background. They tend to operate in smaller centres and they do a little bit of everything. So they're going to want a home, for example. So we don't know where this is going yet, but we want to enable those classes. I should say, yell out if you've got any questions along the way. The proposal at the moment, and believe me, there has been significant debate over this, as to whether or not we retain practice fields. The proposal at the moment is to retain practice fields. Feedback on that is more than welcome. The two reasons that we've sort of said, yeah, on the balance, let's retain them, or let's put them as being retained in consultation. It does support international mobility of staff. So anyone that's younger than me that wants to go and do an OE, it might help you in other jurisdictions. But probably more importantly, by having structural or geotech or something like that after your name, it actually signifies to the members of the public where your specialisation may be. I should have planked out my number. That's me. I'm really pleased that it's not applicable for any suspension when I Googled myself. One of the other things that's happened is, I'm not sure how many people, often you want to know if somebody that you're reviewing CPEng or not, and you've gone onto the Engineering New Zealand website and you go and find an engineer, search our database. It's actually, and we debated as to whether or not we were transgressing the law, but the registration authority actually has to have a register. So now we've got a registration authority website, and I'll give you the I'll give you the web address of that in one of the last slides. And that's been set up such that we can, under registration, you've got one chartered professional engineer, and under that you could have class structural, should that be invented in the future. So for those of you that want to have a play, I would encourage you to go onto the registration, I think it's registration.org website. I'll give it to you at the end. Registration Authority as one word, .org.nz. Right. Any questions so far? Haven't lost anyone? Yeah.
You mentioned practice fields.
Yep.
That's fine. As an assessor, the biggest bone of contention is always the practice area description.
Yes.
So is there any proposals to either standardise it or just do something to make that part of things a little bit, easier? It's always a bone of contention. It doesn't kind of come up there.
No.
It's only, it tends to become public if, for example, you go and get your Auckland Council authorship, then they publicise it, but yeah, it's all a bit.
And it is probably, I agree, it is the most contentious part, right? It doesn't have that you can do seismic assessments. Does that mean you can do them or not, for example? And all of these arguments, there was significant debate about whether to include it in this consultation or not. The reason it's not included is we actually didn't want that argument to distract from the rest of it, if I'm being brutally honest. They know it's a problem, as is the fact that we've got chartered members. So chartered professional and chartered members. So again, there was a conscious decision made, rightly or wrongly, that we would consult on rule changes to enable things to happen in the future. But when I started this is very much stage one of a journey. It would be nice to think we could finish at stage 2, but I suspect there might be a stage after 2, even if it's only 2A. Continued registration. So this is where previously, Engineering New Zealand were getting themselves tied up in all sorts of knots. So the minute you, when you pay your fees and all the rest of it, some of that goes to being re-looked at every 6 years. And when you're doing things based on risk, the question is are we actually using a sledgehammer here to crack a walnut? Now, are we putting a whole bunch of people through the ringer and creating a whole bunch of admin? And we've got no problem doing that if it's required and if we're actually getting results out of it. But the feeling was no, so let's get it a little bit more granular and let's try and come up with something a bit more sensible. And everything was on the table from not doing any continued registration to keeping up the status quo to something in the middle. I spent a bit of time talking to the Californians and people in the UK about sort of the one and done process in terms of proving yourself, and they were all reasonably envious of the fact that we actually go back and have a look every now and again. So that's kind of where we've wound up for the consultation document. So the current process, if you like, is a one-size-fits-all. So you're up for renewal, your application's checked administratively for completeness, then you get a lead assessor and a practice area assessor assigned, unless you're a structural engineer, and then you've got the triage panel. You have panel reviews of the applicant, you have an interactive panel, and then you're accepted or declined. Okay. What's been proposed is this. So again, you start with a continue application. Are there any class-specific requirements in terms of reassessment? If yes, you have to go through the class-specific continued registration process. We don't know what that looks like at the moment because we haven't introduced classes and we haven't got the bodies of knowledge, but it's likely to involve some work samples and some interacts of some description, and then you're accepted or declined. If you're not, we do a desktop review, okay? After that desktop review, are there any unresolved concerns or changes in your practice field identified? And if not, yeah, you're through, okay? So innocent until proven guilty rather than guilty until proven innocent. If, on the other hand, there are some concerns or your practice field has changed, and this might affect, there is also the second part that's got a lot of contention, is when you start progressing up the food chain in larger organisations, you become less hands-on in the tools and you seldom do calculations anymore. And I wish they'd let me loose and do some calculations again. I'm a frustrated engineer at times. We might have a look at, is it appropriate to remain structural, or do you move into management, for example, in terms of engineering? But if there are concerns or your practice area has changed, a more detailed assessment is required, because you're not just proving that you've maintained competency, your practice field has changed somewhat. So you, in some ways, you know, the parts that haven't changed, you prove that you've maintained your competency, but the parts that have changed, you kind of need to prove that you are competent in those areas. And then you get accepted or declined. So what does the desktop review look like? There will be a strengthened emphasis on references. Now, some of the debates going around is it mandatory for one of the references to be from a BCO or someone else that has regularly reviewed your work, as opposed to your mate? When we get to the complaints and disciplinary section, we're proposing some more granularity there. So have any concerns or complaints been raised against you? Because if they have, that's a very big red flag. you're going to have to do some declarations, and I'll show you what those declarations are in a moment. You're going to have to submit a CV, and you are going to have to submit CPD records. And going to night school to learn Word Perfect is no longer acceptable CPD. In fact, there will be guidance, well, there's proposed, I won't say there will be, proposed to be guidance on CPD. So even though I might do 50 hours a year on SESOC management committee work, I can't claim 50 hours a year of SESOC management. You know, some of it has to be technical. There will be an expectation that you have attended some sort of technical conference, seminar, whatever, in a 6-year period. It's not a big ask. Because if you're not engaging in some of that stuff, it's like, well, okay, how are you maintaining your competency? So these are the additional requirements. You'll be required annually to make a commitment to the Code of Ethics and CPD. And you'll also have to sign that you're a fit and proper person, so self-disclosure. Now I realise some of those questions are a bit funny, you know, it's like, are you an honest person? And you'll only ever get one answer. It's just whether it's true or not, right? But we're going to require you to make some declarations. And this is in line with what a whole bunch of other professions do, and it's just considered good practice. How are we going time-wise? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
On the declarations, was there any consideration given to an annual submission of CPD? So not just declaring that you're going to do it, but that you've actually done it for the past year, and this is what I've done.
That, from memory, there's been a lot of conversations, that one actually didn't come up, but it depends on how they ask the question in terms of commitment for professional development. So you could say, do you commit to maintaining, competency through professional development, or have you achieved, or do you intend to achieve this year your not quota, that's a bad word, but your requirements.
Isn't the commitment to the Code of Ethics given anyway?
Yes. It is. And for people that are ethical and all the rest of it, it's something we take really, really seriously. But it doesn't hurt to be reminded every now and again of the responsibility and the powers you've got. And it's only...
IBANs did that.
Yep.
We did it, signed it for a couple of years. Now it says, if you pay your bill, we expect that this is true.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's too much hassle to be with it.
Yeah, and I think,
It's not here nor there, but
it is neither here nor there. And there'll be some of it will be like, oh, this is a bit of a faff. But, if you sit back and you think about it, it's not onerous. And, the public put a great deal of trust in us. And for us to just sign a couple of things once a year, it's not a big deal. I personally am well behind this. I think it's a great initiative. The not so nice part of being on the CPEng board is we're also in charge of governance over the complaints process. And when you see what's going on, it's a real eye-opener. Some of the stuff is just, it's just dumb. Anyway, so we're proposing...
Is there already an annual commitment?
There was, but now it's, you don't actually physically have to do anything. So they're going to strengthen it and make it mandatory. Yeah. But it's the continued professional development. So at the moment, I think you're right, the wording's something by paying the bill, you've agreed to sign up to the Code of Ethics. But it's also about the continuing development and all the rest of it. It's really about taking responsibility for your career. So, the complaints process is quite archaic, and it's really bizarre to get your head around, because once an investigating committee starts or a complaints committee starts, they've effectively only got one question, and is there grounds to dismiss, yes or no? And if the answer's no, then case closed, nothing to close. And there's a whole bunch of, what quantifies as a yes or no, but you might go, gee, this person really needs to go and take a course in this and just pull their socks up a bit, right? But it's not serious enough to warrant disciplinary action. So what they're trying to do with what the proposal to do with the complaints process is make it a bit more proportional to the issues you've been dealt with, and to make it less of a blunt instrument and more of a learning exercise for people that need it. So the addition of a referral to the register for a competence assessment, for example. So we want to enable that. Hey, this person, look, the best thing we can do is they possibly don't meet the grounds for a formal complaint, but I've got some real questions here, because sometimes that can just be to do with the evidence as to, oh gosh, whether it's one way or the other. Actually, we'll send it to someone to have a proper look at this. Additional powers to the investigating committees to recommend a competence assessment to determine if the person meets the minimum standard. Okay. Actually requiring an engineer to apologise. Sounds pretty simple, but we can't even do that at the moment. Undertake training. Can't enforce that at the moment. Mentorship, counselling. So these are all options for when things aren't, serious, but actually we need to improve here. Allow the registration authority to take forward complaints after an investigating committee. So at the moment, the investigating committee decides whether the complaint should be dismissed or not, and then they have to introduce it to the disciplinary committee, etc. I've even, and some of them it's just like, well, why do we even need an investigating committee? I was on one where the judge had actually censored somebody, and you get a minute from a judge saying this person's bad, but you still have to go through the investigation, and it's like, oh, just go straight to the investigating committee, things like that. And there's other procedural matters. At the moment, the chair of the of the disciplinary committee is actually an engineer. If anyone's been following the Ray case, that engineer was having to deal with lawyers at dawn and did an admirable job, but we might actually want to be able to have the chair as a lawyer, for example, going forward. I've probably got one slide ahead of myself. Membership of the committees, yeah. So propose the changes to the investigating and disciplinary committees to broaden the membership to allow appointments of individuals with relevant qualifications, like a lawyer or an investigator. Permit non-engineers to be chairs. And there was a lot of debate about this. And then we came down with sort of the third bullet point. But at the end of the day, the engineers have to outnumber the non-engineers. And for CPEng stuff, CPEng people need to outnumber non-CPEng on these committees is what the proposal is. Now, you might say that we were just being a bit protectionist, in your feedback to that submission. And again, your views would be more than welcome.
But haven't you got all the resources that might be in this engineering, legal department to help you do all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, but I mean, these things can take a hell of a long time, right? And a lot of resources. Yes, there is a team in the legal department of Engineering New Zealand. I think we've currently got about 3. Isaac, Paul, maybe 4. But they are often maxed, and it's not uncommon, particularly in higher profile cases, and unfortunately we've got a few of those in the structural engineering arena, well, some of them have been dealt with lately, where they have to employ expert counsel and or expert witnesses. So these things actually get eye-wateringly expensive very quickly. And you and I pay for that out of our membership fees. Yeah, I've covered everything I need to say over that. Right, timelines. So, consultation, as I said, closes 29th of November. So should the profession agree that these changes are good, that will be the quickest route. So new guidance will be issued on classes, new guidance will be issued on complaints, and updated guidance on continuing registration. Now, all of those sort of mini projects, if you like, will have to be done with professional input from the profession, and there will need to be consultation along the way as well. The real guts on the consultation will be around classes. And as I said, the most likely scenario, if these rule changes are agreed to and enabled, is that Engineering New Zealand, they don't have a technical staff essentially, so they'll go out to their technical groups. So they'll have to go to some sort of independent subject matter experts and say, we want help with the body of knowledge and skills, and we want to understand what sort of classes they are. Now, as structural engineers, it is likely, but nothing's set in stone, that fire, geotech and structure will be the first three cabs off the rank. And what will happen is there will be a frame, well, what's likely to happen is there will be a precedent and a framework set up with those three that other disciplines and technical branches may or may not choose to follow. We have, but that's like, say for example, it's decided that there's more than one structural class. That will need to be tweaked. Okay. I guess the good thing about classes, should they be enacted, is currently with the 12 competencies, there's kind of one bar. You can set it slightly up and down by how you interpret those 12 competencies, but it's almost like the Three Musketeers, you know, all for one and one for all approach across all disciplines. This new one will enable different bars above a minimum. So the CPEng's general will be minimum, and you can go above that if need be. So one of the other catalysts for this was post the Christchurch Earthquakes was the Canterbury Royal Commission, where it actually recommended a higher bar for structural engineering. So it's not off the table and it's not out of the question for some of the structural classes to be a bit tougher to get into.
When you say tougher, you mean something along the lines of an actual quantitative assessment rather than our current more qualitative assessment? Perhaps not as bad as, say, I-Struct-T.
Maybe not.
8-hour exam, but something that's a bit more, you know, quantitative rather than
It's funny, eh? And it might just be my bias, because when I left university, I vowed I'd never wanted to sit another exam as long as I ever lived, but that's just personal baggage. I think there's going to, my personal belief is there's going to be great debate over the word examination. Because examination doesn't necessarily mean a written exam. You know, it means an examination of a candidate. Now, that could be, you know, as we had under registered engineers, it could be an essay and an interactive. It could be more like an I-Struct-D or a Californian model where you've actually got a physical test. Be careful what you wish for there. I was at the SESOC conference last month, and they've gone to computer-based exam things, and apparently you can only have one screen. Long story short, it's gone from a 50% pass rate to a 30%. Because people can't actually get the exam to work, and you know you're allowed to have certain things, but they can only get one screen working at a time, and it's so be careful what you wish for. But yes, that is actually that is seriously on the table. And the other thing that's theoretically possible under the introduction classes, you know, say the transportation engineers have a class, they might choose to have an interactive, and the structural engineers might choose to have a written exam, for example. Yes?
So, being familiar with the California perspective of written exam for a professional engineer, which is a more general civil, past that, another written exam for the SE, where you can then do high occupancy, high risk. Because there's a benefit of that rigor and gets away from subjective interpretation and then gains a lot of trust with the public. However, has there been thought within that discussion around how that will be implemented and administered in New Zealand, given that we have half the population in the city of Los Angeles?
Short answer is no.
And is there an opportunity to piggyback on either UK or California and because those questions get updated every year?
Yep.
And large committees writing them.
Yep.
To piggyback on that and modify so that it fits New Zealand standard.
So again, that's part of the almost torrential downpour of water that's got to go under the bridge. Nothing's off the table. Nothing's been predetermined with this consultation, including the outcome of feedback. But I've been around where people have been debating exam or not for quite a while. So you're right about a small population working against us in terms of the exams. But in terms of the 6-year requalification, it actually works for us. Californians, it would be horrendous to actually re-examine everyone every 6 years, whereas next year we've got a peak because it's the a 5th year anniversary, and our peak is to put 900 candidates through next year, a reassessment process, whereas normally it's about 650, 700. So, you know, that's where our smaller population really works for us.
Does this only come into effect when 6 years expires?
Well, because what we're actually talking about is changes to the rules, the Parliamentary Council Office, PCO, have said that they will allow Engineering New Zealand to write the rule change proposals, and then they'll have to do all of their regulatory process and all the rest of it. And then, I'll get Jodie to explain it later on, then it goes through a parliamentary process, but I don't think it's as rigorous as select committees and bills into the House and all that kind of.
It's easier to change.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can see that it could put quite a bit of pressure on our resources in terms of someone who's been practicing for 30 years, they're an excellent engineer, are really switched on and everything, they just can't be bothered to sit an exam. And all of a sudden we lose someone who can be actually very valuable to the engineering profession, but they can only remain at the general level.
Yep.
So with the limited number of engineers we have, are we taking the risk of losing so many?
Yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy. You know, my first mentor and someone I really admire never got CPEng because, you know, he was stubborn and he'd been a registered engineer. Why the hell should I have to prove myself again? I guess it's actually not about us. It's about members of the public. If you go back to those principles, you know, yes, I was going to say a naughty word there. It can be a bit of a pain to fill out some paperwork, but is it really that onerous to spend 8, 10 hours once every 6 years filling out some paperwork? You know, it's part of being a professional. I mean, don't know about you, but I hate paying taxes. It's part of being a citizen.
Yeah. But my doctor only has to do 20 or 30 hours of CPD. Most other professionals do the CPD and they
Yeah.
assume it works. We say, do your CPD and, oh, we don't believe it works, so we're going to have to check you again. So we're, pretty out of kilter with most other professions.
Yeah, well,
I mean, the doctor could kill me by giving me the wrong prescription.
oh well, every time you get a whole bunch of professionals in a room, it will normally degrade the conversation into who can kill the most people in one go. Sorry, I shouldn't have been so flippant there. Tim.
Two questions. Quick one. Has there been chats with Auckland Council specifically as to whether they'll scrap their own register if any of this changes goes through? Too early for that?
I've got to be very careful about what I say here. This is public knowledge. Jeff Farrinson, who effectively runs the council inspection team from Auckland, is a CPEng board member. Okay, and whilst he can't necessarily speak on behalf of Auckland Council and all the rest of it, if this is implemented with some rigour, there is a better than, in my personal opinion, there's a better than average chance that you might get your way.
But they check CPD, professional indemnity insurance as well, so you can still have it for that. And they've never really done what I've been wanted to do about registration. So donkeys use it, but they published the register when it wasn't supposed to be published. And this is
Yeah.
stuff like Ben, we're doing our own thing with Auckland Council.
Well, if I was to be employed by the council tomorrow, I would probably say something along the lines of they are doing what they believe is right to manage their risk. The sad thing for me personally, that kind of almost says they don't have confidence in the system.
Yeah, but they've got, on their list, they've got waterproofing agents, they've got
Yep.
everything on there, so.
But, the thing that I personally find sad is they don't have confidence.
Obviously they have confidence, but they make this a prerequisite.
Anyway, we've been sidetracked. Ali?
In terms of let's say that we put the classes and we go as usual in terms of putting the assessments, but I mean, for a specific class, we need to go for certain assessor that we have knowledge on it, specific classes themselves too. So that will be kind of limited people, assess limited people in terms of the resource that we expect the timing and or sometimes may cause some, conflict of interest situation.
Look, the problem with New Zealand is, right, our size is we're a village. We're not going to get around from that. And there's things like grandparenting. There's a hell of a lot of water to go under the bridge. The best description I heard sometimes is one of those throwaway lines, we're building this plane as we're flying it. So you're looking at what the classes might be and how they might be implemented. There's a hell of a lot of water to go under that bridge yet, and a lot of debate. And one of the things that actually is on the screen is there will be consultation on classes, because that's where the real hard work is, right? That's where we've got the opportunity to raise standards.
I see you had, someone mentioned 3 referees in some of the examples. I mean, you work for that firm, so you have plenty of referees, but when you work for yourself, it's darn hard. We used to use council officers, but hard to get from the council.
Yeah.
Someone that did a structural check on a 1.7 metre high retaining wall mine recently, and doing a peer review of someone else's work and then checking it as well.
Look, one thing, reassessors, we have tested this process through the introduction of recognised dam safety. Oh yeah, what Jodie's sort of saying there is, in terms of the referees and some of the assessments, the dam safeties has tested this with low numbers. Okay, so, well, in terms of dam safety recognised people on the register,
It's a very specialised.
it's a very, I think it's circa 20 nationally sort of thing.
It's not like saying all the structural people are doing it.
Correct. And part of part of being in a profession and part of what we're doing is, you know, we have to accept we're not going to get it 100% right the first time. But if we make an improvement,
Why don't they accept other architects, clients as referees?
we're not predetermining anything at the moment. The requirement for referees is the requirements at the moment, right, under our current system. Now, it may well be that continues over for the general class. What happens in other classes is yet to be determined.
It's mighty hard when you're working by yourself to someone assign that they've done the work, who else is going to do it?
Granted. How am I going for time? Oh, geez, I'm just about out of time. Sorry about that. So again, just a reminder of the timeline. This isn't going to happen overnight. I feel like quoting Rachel Hunter there. So we're looking at 2026 before the rules, assuming everyone says, yep, this is a good thing, before the rules are enacted to enable the classes and all the rest of it. Now, we can start the work on classes once the consultation's over and everyone said, yes, it's a good thing. But, you know, we're still 2 or 3 years.
There's no real difference in having a practice area of structural or a class of structural engineering, a whole lot more requirements.
Well, I guess the difference will be, potentially the difference will be in around where you choose to set the bodies of knowledge and skills. Okay, now they may be at the same or a similar level to the general class, they might be higher. Yeah, Tim.
Assuming classes go ahead, is there complete freedom for the regulatory authority, regulatory schools to define what the classes are? Are there still some limits on what classes could be, say, as restricted by the CPEng?
I won't say complete freedom, but there's not a lot of guidance. So if you adopt the approach, well, they haven't said I can't do it. There's probably not a lot you can't do. No, it's not that. But the rules are being enabled because there's a hell of a lot of rigmarole to go through to change the rules, right? So if you have some rules that enable you to do things and then you actually put the things that you do want to review from time to time in the process side of things, it just means that in the future, if we need to tweak it, it's easy to make changes. Doesn't mean that there'll be any less rigour, but it just means that, you know. So at the moment, Paul Kirby, General Counsel at Engineering New Zealand, has gone to the Parliamentary Council office and has had to go cap in hand and seek permission to be able to write these rules, because typically the Parliamentary Council office write all the rules. So we've been given that, so that's tick 1. And you must remember the last MB document that got sent out, there was a real suggestion that Engineering New Zealand wasn't even going to regulate engineers going forward. The regulatory function was going to be taken off them. So again, if you go back to that slide, we've got to do it to ourselves or someone else is going to do it to us. Just a bit of a plug. There's some webinars coming up from Engineering New Zealand. Pretty much everything I've said tonight is on, Jodie's actually done it a damn sight quicker in about 17 minutes video.
Does that come out?
Yeah, you can YouTube, it's on YouTube. So if you go onto the Engineering New Zealand website, there'll be links. That's the website for the Registration Authority. And some of the things that we have changed. So top left-hand side there, that was the process we went through for the triage panel. Bottom right-hand is there's a whole lot of guidance for reassessment. So if you're up for reassessment, read that. It's a real good hint. This is a screenshot of the top part of the Registration Authority web page, and you can read more about the triage panel there. Sorry that's taken a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but time for any rich conversation. And Jodie, please yell out answers. Well, maybe not yell, just speak them because I don't know what your volume's like. So are there any questions? Yeah.
Are there any plans to make this appeal to other engineering classes, like, for instance, electrical and mechanical engineers? Because at the moment, there's not really a lot of attraction to be CPEng.
Correct, there's not, which is why the general class exists, and it could well be that the general class and the membership class come together a lot closer. So chartered members, for example, could be a general CPEng class.
There's no point in doing a first registration and becoming as a structural engineer and then becoming a general one and then having to do it again for a class. Unless
Well,
the class is more specific.
You say that, but, and I'm no expert in the medical profession, but,
Medical, I'm saying, if you're going to do it for structural and then you, for the first time, and then to get into the general class, and then you have to do it again to get into a structural class.
I can't speak, my mic is muted by the host. Oh, God. Okay. I could make a crass joke.
The blue one.
Blue one.
Yep. Or maybe the mic. We can hear you, or maybe turn on the video. That may help them. I don't know.
No, it should be, there is bottom left,
Bottom left.
there is a red thing, just a bit of.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, that one.
That one.
Yeah. But doesn't help.
Doesn't help me. Sorry, you're huge again, Jodie. She doesn't like seeing herself that.
Maybe click.
Sorry, Jodie. Best laid plans and all that. Let me
Came back with when you clicked it, it came back with unmute. So
mute my audio.
Can you, Jody? Can you talk? If we can hear you.
Go
Okay.
to participants.
Hang on, we got a lecturer coming, Jodie. So, damn sight brighter than I am.
Yeah, that
Has to unmute.
Hello.
one. Okay.
Oh, yay!
Hello.
Please keep going. Apologies for the delay.
I can't remember what the question was now. So, have we got any questions? Because Jodie's a hang of a lot better at all this legal stuff than I am.
Well, it's probably not quite the topic of today's discussion, but CPD is sort of a bit of a common thread throughout this. Is there any plans, I guess, to revamp the CPD system? Because, the Engineering New Zealand website's a bit painful to use. And, and for example, is there thoughts about going towards something like the architects have where there's nominated points for specific activities and it takes away some of the admin for itself, figuring out how much value there is in a certain thing?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Am I really loud? Am I blasting you?
That's good.
That's okay.
Okay. So we are revamping our system. So we've moved to a new provider for the platform, Totara. That will allow any courses that you do through Engineering New Zealand to automatically go into a log or a register of your courses. So there's a bit of work on the IT behind in the back of the system. We're also working on course offerings and structuring those course offerings on a framework. So there's quite a lot of work. The governing board is about to release their strategic plan for the next 3 years. So that's coming on Thursday. And you'll see CPD is very high on the governing board's plans. As far as CPEng goes with the registration authority, we're also thinking about providing further guidance on expectations around that annual commitment. So there's a bit of work happening in both component parts of the organisation, but it's the thing we hear the most about when we go out and ask people for feedback about how Engineering New Zealand is performing. It's around CPD.
Thank you.
The question was, who do you ask? The answer's members. So Member Connect, the Engineering New Zealand staff, get out to structural group meetings, and they go to other technical groups. So there's casual conversation, there's formal conversation.
We survey every year, and we will do at the end of every course now, and other things.
The other thing to note in terms of surveys, anyone that's been through the reassessment process, there is a survey at the end now about how well people do, and it's one of those net promoter score things. So, I still can't get my head around it, but if you don't score more than about 7 or 8, you're a detractor.
When this new role is going to be implemented?
So the first hurdle, Ali, in terms of the new rules, is the consultation. So if everyone says that it's absolute rubbish and it's back to square one, that'll put a slight spanner in the works. But we'll take that very seriously. Should everyone say, yep, good idea, we put the timeline in now, but and it's always difficult to predict, but the new rules, all things going well, would come into effect 1 January 2026.
Or is the registration authority preferring feedback on the consultation to come from CPEng engineers as individuals, or is lumped feedback through via organisations? Happy with that?
All would be welcome, so any feedback's welcome. Do you want to give some statistics on some of the stuff we've had back so far, Jodie? It's quite astounding, actually.
I think we've had 92 submissions. 2 of them are written, so free form, and 89 are through the SurveyMonkey that we've got going. I think about 5 of those are people representing their organisations. So the last time we consulted in 2020, we got quite significant submissions from groups, particularly the technical groups or BCA representatives, that sort of thing. So all is welcome. We'll analyse them, and if you go back into the work we did in 2020, you can see how we analyse it. We analyse the organisation submissions in a separate component part to the SurveyMonkey, so we can see trends through both of them and the comments through both.
How do you get on, like, is this sort of back-ended licensing system? And, like, when you got someone's adding one room onto their house or the side of Mount Albert that's got existing house and they're adding a bit onto it, and council wants a geotech report and site observation for 10 boreholes or whatever, standard footing and good ground. Is that saying that has to be done by a geotech class engineer, whereas a building inspector and a builder used to be able to look at what was good ground and what wasn't, and what was basically good ground. So that looks okay.
So, can't answer that question, but what you're actually doing there is we're consulting on occupational regulation, and I don't think there'd be anyone in this room that says our system's perfect at the moment. So what you're actually talking about is the evidence-based as part of the consenting code of compliance system. So I always like to think of it as sort of almost a 3-legged stool, and the whole system falls down. One of the legs is occupational regulation. The other is a building consent system, and we'd be here for a week if we wanted to debate the ins and outs of a building consent system. And I don't propose to be here a week. And one's the sort of the construction side of things as well. So we've got to be very clear about fixing let's not say fixing, let's say improving what we can improve. And for the constraints of tonight, that's occupational regulation.
Some of it depends on what the classes are going to be.
Yep, and that's the most difficult job that we've got at the moment. Engineers tend to be detailed people, And you want to know what the answer is, and we're telling you what a potential process could look like. So, yeah, that's the most difficult thing about this whole phase. But rest assured, as long as there's breath in my body, the next phase when it comes to classes, the professional, so probably SESOC, but a SESOC equivalent, will have significant input into where it goes.
Because we had some years ago, had the IPN rules changed, and then they say, oh, we should have this because everybody else has got it. There was about the amount of explanation we got, and then we had to change our board, and all the staff down at Wellington have to get lessons. And we weren't all told all that, and they said, oh, we'll just include this because everybody else has got this.
Yeah, look, I'd like to think we can do better this time, but it's one of those situations, right? We're not going to please all the people all the time, and I guess I'm in this, as I said at the start, because it's something I passionately believe in, that as a profession we're going to get the reputation we deserve, so let's hold ourselves to high standards and prove to the public we deserve to be held up as the professionals we are.
But haven't we done a whole lot already since the last 20 years?
We have.
The requirements every time.
We have, but you ask the public. If you Google, and I don't want to get into a debate of this, if you Google structural engineering or engineers, right, and admittedly papers are sensationalists, and you look at the headlines.
Well, because the Christchurch building fell down.
It doesn't matter. Perception is reality in the public eye, you know, and that's the shame of it. There is we have some of the best engineers in the world. Fantastic engineering is done in New Zealand, but we're only as good, well, capacity design, right? We're only as good as our weakest link. Yep, we probably need to wrap this up soonish, but yep.
Usually when I get the CPEng, you are getting CPEng based on your project that you have experience and work on. And sometimes, for example, if you haven't done, let's say, a specific design, you will not get that experience, and you will never get that class. Is there any way that we can also, although you haven't done that experience, but I mean, you can assess with other systems to get that class or so?
Great question, Ali. Look, I would hate to have anything to do with a system that was so rigorous that it prevented us from being the learning profession that we are. Someone has to do something for the first time every time, right? If you think about, go back to Bill Robinson, base isolation. Someone has a good idea. It's how you go through the QA and the proving of that good idea and how you act. And we'll get it wrong. We've got it wrong in the past. Who thought Dicor was a great idea? So, but what we can't do is well, in my opinion, I'm not speaking as a board member, I'm not speaking on behalf of New Zealand, but I would hate to see a system that was so rigorous that it A, stifled innovation, and B, meant that we couldn't continue to be the learning profession we are. So you've got to do something for the first time. Now, how do we do that? We do that, if someone else has done it, we do it with supervision or guidance or, someone helping you. And then all of a sudden you gain some competency in that, and it's your job as a professional to pass that knowledge on to others. Okay, you don't give away trade secrets, but, you teach. We're in a learning profession. And that's something I'm really passionate about, because otherwise, we won't invent anything new. There's cool stuff to be discovered. Anyway, I'll get off my hobby horse now. Hey, look, I really want to thank you. If there's anything that we haven't answered tonight, and I'm going to put Jodie on the spot here, please email us, which means email her. Sorry. No, Jodie's wonderful. My inbox is full. But if you've got some burning questions, please ask. Please encourage your colleagues, peers, friends to give us feedback. Even if you think we've got it wildly wrong, we actually want your opinion.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Thanks, team. And thank you, Jodie. You've been awesome.